The fourth installment of Capcom's popular survival horror series saw the player once again taking up the role of Leon Kennedy, tasked with locating and rescuing the president's daughter from a cult known as the Enlightened Ones. Now, Resident Evil 4 deviated from the well-established formula of the franchise and instead presented the action from a third-person perspective, as opposed to the fixed camera angles of old. This divided the fanbase at the time, and many wondered if it was the right move for the franchise going forward. Now, ultimately, it does come down to taste. Personally, the presentation of the earlier games is what made Resident Evil so memorable, but it is hard to deny that Resident Evil 4 is anything but exceptional. The main aspect that deserves praise has to be the gameplay. The lack of tank controls could have potentially sacrificed some of the scare factor, but thanks to the camera's close proximity to Leon, it manages to instill that feeling of fear. To top this off, moving while shooting is not an option. Every time a weapon is drawn, the player leaves themselves open to the hordes of enemies hunting them down. Now, the PlayStation 2 release brings with it extra content in the form of an extra mode known as Separate Ways that sees fan favourite Ada Wong making an appearance and focuses on a relationship with longtime series villain Albert Wesker. As well as this, upon completing the story, there are more modes for the player to get stuck into, one being the Mercenaries mode, as well as several unlockable costumes and weapons. Starting life on the original PlayStation, Tekken went on to become one of the most popular fighting franchises alongside the likes of Street Fighter. The plot once again follows the Mishima family and the focus on the King of the Iron Fist tournament that sees many fighters from around the world come together with the hope of being crowned the winner. New to the fourth iteration was the inclusion of limited arenas, as opposed to the never-ending levels present in the series up until this point. It was a nice touch and introduced an extra aspect to each encounter that resulted in a slightly faster style of play. Couple this with a new complete freedom of movement, a far cry from the limited sidesteps of old, and what you have is a new intuitive setup that was bound to excite fans both old and new. A whole host of characters occupy the roster, with fan favourites and new fighters filling the ranks, with enough diversity in its cast that there's bound to be someone for everyone to enjoy. As well as your standard arcade and story modes, Tekken 4 boasts an incredible multiplayer experience, and to be honest, this is where the game shines, especially when both players are of a comparable skill level. Visually, the game's a bit of a stunner. Each stage, animation and effect comes to life with a vibrancy and energy that can be felt throughout the entire game. If you're a fan of the series, this one is a no-brainer, and if you're looking for a very competent fighter on the PS2, look no further than Tekken 4. Kingdom Hearts saw the worlds of Square and Disney combine to create something truly special, as well as a whole host of new characters to fall in love with. The player fills the role of Sora, a young boy who is thrown into a world full of mystery and intrigue, intent on saving his friends Riku and Kairi, who had disappeared due to the actions of dark beings known as the Heartless. The journey is comprised of various Disney-themed worlds that celebrate some of the most well-known films from the company's past, as well as a few made by Square chucked in. But the gameplay is the real star of the show. Kingdom Hearts is an absolute joy to play. Progression is handled very well, with Sora and his companions gaining new abilities and equipment throughout the game. In battle, you only have to mainly worry about yourself, with the other party members being handed off to the AI, which does an incredible job in supporting the player's decisions. But one main aspect of Kingdom Hearts to mention as well has to be its sweeping and epic soundtrack that only complements the experience and elevates the events that transpire. Since its introduction in 1997, Gran Turismo has become well known for its mantra, the real driving simulator. The series has always prided itself on its incredible respect and passion for the sport, and to this day continues to push the franchise forward in the pursuit of perfecting the racing experience. Now, the fourth iteration was no exception to this, and defined what was possible on the PlayStation 2. The incredible amount of content both on and off the track, cutting-edge visuals for the time that still hold up now, and of course the addictive career mode that comprises the main bulk of the experience. It will have you competing in a host of unique events across a diverse set of locations, each with their own tracks and visual flourishes that bring each race to life. Gran Turismo 4 is based on real life, and as such you need to take your time and get accustomed to how each car functions. With practice, the process of braking, hitting the apex, when to floor it, and shifting gears soon becomes second nature. Seriously, call sick into work, drop out of college, break up with your girlfriend. It may sound extreme, but once GT mode sucks you in, you're a goner. Literally hours, days, weeks of your life are about to disappear without you even realizing it. Zone of the Enders 2 picks up 2 years after the events of the previous game and puts the player in the shoes of a young man known as Dingo, who happens to stumble across an orbital frame known as Duity that played a pivotal role in the previous game. A lot more emphasis was put on the battle system this time around, resulting in a game that focuses more on action, which was one of the major complaints with the first outing due to the lack of it. Because of this, Duity's arsenal and abilities have seen a huge improvement. A wide array of new weapons and skills are now available to the player, which manages to open up many different ways in which to approach each mission and experiment with all of the options at your disposal. Visually, Zone of the Enders 2 is a stunner. Taking on a somewhat cel-shaded aesthetic, it manages to present the on-screen action in a very stylish and memorable way that elevates it beyond the original's presentation in almost every aspect. If you still haven't given this one a go, there has never been a better time, with the title now being available on modern consoles. Coming from the same team that brought us Eco, Shadow of the Colossus introduces us to a young man named Wanda, who's tasked with defeating a total of 16 huge beasts known as Colossi that occupy the game's incredibly beautiful world, and a real beauty it is. Seriously, just traversing through the environment is exhilarating within itself due to the sheer scope and weight of the surroundings. If there were ever a strong case that games should be classed as art, Shadow of the Colossus is the first example I'd point to. Gameplay wise, it is a pretty simple affair, with most of the challenge coming from figuring out how to bring down each separate colossi, who all differ in appearance as well as size. Armed with only a sword and a bow, it can seem daunting going up against your targets, but therein lies the brilliance of the experience. A real sense of overcoming the odds permeates throughout the journey, but with a surprising twist that will most likely stay with you long after the credits have rolled. In all honesty, Shadow of the Colossus is one of the finest games available on the system, and will make one hell of a worthy addition to any gamer's collection. Anticipation was high for the first entry in the Final Fantasy series on the PlayStation 2, and in no way did the 10th installment disappoint, conveying the story of Tidus and his unlikely group of companions as they struggle to overcome the threat of an evil entity known as Sin. The journey can last up to 100 hours depending on your playstyle and lust for side content. Essentially a turn-based RPG, battles play out quite predictably to those familiar with the genre, with a whole host of abilities, spells and summons to get to grips with and utilize in battle. Now this was the first in the series to feature fully voice acted characters that managed to, in terms of presentation, elevate the story beyond the games that had come before. Admittedly, questionable dialogue made the cut, like the infamous laughing scene that will no doubt go down in cringe history, but in all honesty it only manages to add to the charm of the experience. A great feature of Final Fantasy X has to be the way in which growing each character's abilities is presented, opting for a system known as the Sphere Grid. Each party member is rewarded AP points upon surviving a battle, which can then be used to move about the various nodes set on the grid that have the chance of altering their stats or gaining abilities. This was a very intuitive way to bring a new level of choice to the player in regards to leveling up party members. If you're looking for an unforgettable RPG to play on the PS2, then Final Fantasy X is the perfect choice. Silent Hill, Konami's answer to the Resident Evil series, instead focused on more of a psychological approach to its horror, as opposed to the emphasis on action present in Capcom's franchise. Because of this fact, Silent Hill 2 is in nearly every way a much more disturbing experience. As the player, you take control of James Sunderland, who has travelled to Silent Hill with the hopes of locating his deceased wife after receiving a letter from her despite her being dead for 3 years. The bulk of the experience sees the player navigating the town, finding keys or other items to bypass doors or other obstructions, with less focus on killing enemies. Occasionally puzzles will be presented to the player, often with riddles left up to interpretation, and in all honesty this is where the game truly comes into its own. Even the most seemingly insignificant items will pop into your possession throughout the journey, with only your wits and cunning to guide you as to what to do with them. With a cast of intriguing characters and disturbing enemies, Silent Hill 2 will constantly be throwing you off guard with its well-crafted narrative and atmosphere, making it one of the most essential games on the system. After the runaway success of the PlayStation original, it made sense for Hideo Kojima to carry on the legend of Solid Snake and to bring his particular cinematic flair to yet another entry in the long-running series. Picking up after the events of the previous adventure, the player is tasked with retrieving photographic evidence of a new type of Metal Gear that is being transported on board a tanker, and as you can imagine, it doesn't take long before everything goes south. Taking many cues from its predecessor, the gameplay remains largely intact, with a few new inclusions that give both more control and options to the player. But the main star of the show is the incredibly well-woven and thought-provoking narrative that manages to touch on some really interesting subjects and still resonate to this day. Visually, Metal Gear Solid 2 conveys what the PlayStation 2 was capable of and is a true testament to the team behind it, considering how early on in the PlayStation 2's lifecycle it arrived. Although Metal Gear Solid 3 is in most ways a better game, the story that is presented within Sons of Liberty is something truly special that should be experienced by everyone. San Andreas is the pinnacle of the Grand Theft Auto series on the PlayStation 2. It managed to further develop the formula that made its predecessors so popular by introducing new aspects to the experience, such as no loading times between areas and impressive side content that contributes to your character's attributes and effectiveness. The player assumes the role of Carl Johnson, a man wrongly accused of a murder who is subsequently thrown into the underworld of a 90s LA. As you would expect, all the pop culture references really shine, with specific movies being referenced, as well as an incredible soundtrack that will take you back in time. The gameplay remains intact from the previous iterations and really comes into its own with the added emphasis on customization and progression right down to gaining weight or regularly getting your hair cut, all tying into your performance or reputation within the game. An insane amount of weapons and vehicles, from cars to motorbikes and even military-grade jets, are afforded to the player, but what truly made San Andreas special is the incredibly detailed world crafted by Rockstar that to this day still feels full of life, and with the generous amount of activities it presents, it never manages to get old.